What if Earth's beginning contains a hidden chapter, a chapter existing between Genesis verse 1 and everything we think we know about creation? For centuries, Bible readers noticed something odd in Genesis chapter 1. The shift from perfection to chaos feels abrupt, almost violent. Verse 1 declares creation complete, finished, perfect. Verse 2 describes something broken, formless, shrouded in darkness. That gap between verses sparked a question that refuses to die. Was God starting fresh, or restoring something already ruined? This isn't fringe idea whispered in dark corners of theology. Respected Bible scholars have wrestled with it seriously. The theory has a name gap theory, or ruin restoration view, and biblical clues supporting it are more interesting than you might expect. Let's examine what those verses actually say. Genesis 1 verse 1 reads like beginning of an epic. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It sounds complete, absolute, total. But then verse 2 arrives like door opening onto shadow. Now the earth was without form and void. The Hebrew word here is tohu vabohu. It doesn't mean empty or unfinished in neutral way. It carries weight of chaos, ruin, desolation. Ancient translations often rendered it as waste or desolation. That's not language of blank canvas, waiting for color. It's language of something that has collapsed. The darkness that follows feels even more troubling. Darkness covered the face of the deep. A deep water, deep waters, deep chaos. Not gentle waters of sky or sea. This is language of disorder, of something gone wrong. Here is where the question becomes unavoidable. If God just created earth in verse 1, why would it immediately be described as ruined? Why wouldn't text simply say God created earth and it was good? Instead, it jumps to state of chaos and demands restoration. Some scholars argue this gap between verses 1 and 2 might be vast, not hours or days, but ages. Potentially ages filled with events text doesn't explicitly describe. The logic goes like this. Verse 1 is original creation, perfect, complete, everything in order. Then something catastrophic happened in the gap. The fall of Satan, perhaps a rebellion that shook heavens and devastated earth. By time we reach verse 2, we're standing in rubble. God then spends next 6 days rebuilding, restoring, renewing. This is why Hebrew word for what God does is sometimes significant. The word bara in verse 1 can mean to create from nothing, but word in creative days that follow is sometimes different. Asa often means to make, to form, to shape. A maker who shapes existing material does something different from creation from nothing. One brings something into being where nothing existed before. The other works with what's already there, restoring it. This linguistic detail fuels the theory further. Now, where does this catastrophe come from? The Bible drops hints in other places. Isaiah 14 describes rebellion in heaven, heavenly being who wanted God's throne. Ezekiel 28 paints portrait of perfection, corrupted being of light, twisted by pride. These passages are often interpreted as describing Satan's fall, but some scholars ask deeper question. What if that rebellion didn't just happen in heavenly realm? What if its consequences reached down to earth? If being of immense power fell from heaven, wouldn't earth feel impact? Wouldn't creation itself bear the scars? This is where pieces start fitting together for those holding this view. Satan's rebellion wasn't just cosmic event, it was event that shattered the world. The earth God declared good became wasteland overnight. Verse 2 isn't showing us creation's infancy, it's showing us creation's funeral until God began work of restoration. This is where theory becomes theologically rich. It suggests creation week wasn't about making everything from absolute zero. It was about healing, restoring, putting broken pieces back in order. God surveyed the ruin and got to work. Day 1 light returned to darkness. Day 2, order to the waters. Day 3, land emerged from chaos, and so on until world was restored to habitability. By day 6, when Adam was created, world was ready again. The restoration was complete. This view is called ruin restoration theory, or gap theory, and it answers something that's bothered careful readers for a long time. But here's what matters now. Is this actually what Genesis teaches? The traditional Christian view takes different stance entirely. Most mainstream theologians argue Genesis 1 describes creation in process, not ruin. They say without form and void doesn't describe ruin, but incompleteness. The earth wasn't broken, it was unfinished. God was methodically shaping it into world it would become. The darkness and waters weren't signs of catastrophe, but simply starting point. Before God separated light from darkness, there was darkness. This is normal, not sinister. Before God gathered waters into seas, all was water. This is development, not destruction. The traditional view sees Genesis as straightforward. God creates materials, then shapes them over 6 days. There's no hidden backstory, no catastrophe, no gap. Just creation unfolding in orderly sequence. This view is simpler, more directly stated, doesn't require reading between lines. But simplicity isn't always same as accuracy. Both interpretations rest on how you read the Hebrew. And Hebrew, like all ancient languages, isn't always transparent. The phrase without form and void really could mean either thing, incompleteness or ruin, depending on context. The same darkness, seeming ominous, could simply be neutral state before light. Translation matters enormously here. The King James Version reads more dramatically, which can influence interpretation. Modern translations tend toward neutral reading, but original Hebrew sits beneath both, refusing to be completely certain. This is where honest believers have to admit something. The text is not airtight on this question. It hints at mystery, but doesn't prove full theory. That's important to acknowledge from the start. The gap theory fills blanks with reasonable deduction, but it is deduction, not explicit statement. Still, the theory has real theological power. It suggests chaos and ruin aren't new to our world. Satan's rebellion didn't begin with humanity. It preceded us. The earth was already damaged before we ever arrived. This reframes how we understand world's brokenness. It suggests what we experience now isn't God's perfect design corrupted by human sin alone. It's world that was broken before we were born into it. This carries strange comfort for some people. It means world's pain isn't exclusively our fault, and it means restoration is in God's nature, not just punishment. Creation Week becomes act of renewal and healing, not just building something new, but fixing what was already broken. There's theology here resonating with our experience of damaged world. But we should also ask what we can actually know with certainty. The Bible clearly teaches God created the world. The Bible clearly teaches Satan is fallen angel. The Bible clearly teaches earth is broken and needs redemption. These things are explicit and beyond debate. What remains genuinely unclear is whether Genesis 1 verses 1 through 2 describe pre-fall creation. The text permits the reading but doesn't demand it. Other scholars point out if this theory were crucial, it would be stated more clearly. Paul doesn't hint at pre-human catastrophe on earth. Jesus doesn't reference Satan's fall causing earthly destruction. The New Testament seems comfortable with straightforward reading of Genesis. That's worth weighing. Still, gap theory isn't heretical or absurd. It's serious interpretive choice with real scholars behind it. It simply asks same questions about Genesis 1 verse 2 that any careful reader should ask. Why does text move from created to formless and void so abruptly? Why does restoration language dominate Creation Week? Why does text sometimes hint at deeper backstory? These are fair questions, and they deserve serious answers. The answer might be God works in orderly stages, and text simply shows that, or answer might be yes, something happened between verse 1 and verse 2. Both are defensible from biblical text. What matters is we read carefully, think deeply, stay humble about what we claim to know. The Hebrew text is real history of interpretation, is real theological questions, are real. We don't need to resolve this debate to follow Jesus or trust Scripture, but we do need to think about it honestly. So what does gap theory actually mean for how we read Genesis? If it's true, creation week becomes story about renewal, not just creation. The 6 days become act of cosmic restoration. God takes broken world and makes it livable again. Adam is born into renewed world, not untouched one. Human history then unfolds in cosmos that was already damaged. When Adam sins, he corrupts world that carries older scars. This doesn't excuse human sin, but it contextualizes it. We're not responsible for Satan's rebellion, only for our own choices. Yet we inherit consequences of both his fall and ours. If theory is false, creation week remains what most people believe. God makes everything from nothing in 6 days. The formless void is simply unfinished state, not ruined one. Adam enters perfect world, and his choices bring first fracture. Everything that follows flows from that moment. This reading is cleaner, more straightforward, requires less speculation. It's also what most Christians have believed throughout history. But here's what unites both interpretations. Both agree God created everything and sustains everything. Both agree world is fallen and broken. Both agree restoration through Christ is story of Scripture. The gap theory is detail, not foundation. It's interesting to wrestle with, but not essential to faith. A Christian can reject gap theory entirely and follow Jesus fully. A Christian can embrace it and do same. The theory rises and falls on biblical scholarship, not on salvation, and that's where we should leave it. So what remains most intriguing about this debate? It's that Genesis 1 verse 2 genuinely does feel like aftermath. The text's own language creates that sensation. Even if we reject gap theory, we can't deny impression versus leave. Something about formless and void and darkness over deep sounds like ruin. A reader doesn't have to be biased to feel it. The Hebrew itself carries that weight. This might be intentional on Moses' part. He might have wanted reader to feel world's brokenness, to sense something was wrong before restoration began. Not because there was literally gap in time, but because language itself evokes cosmic struggle between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, between God's will and rebellion against it. This is power of Genesis opening. It speaks to deeper truth regardless of gap theory's validity. The world is not as it should be. Even at very beginning of biblical narrative we sense this. The text hints there are forces and events beyond its immediate scope, mysteries that predate human story, but shape it. This is why serious readers keep asking these questions, and why debate old as it is never quite dies. The gap theory might be wrong about timeline, but it's right about the intuition. Something feels broken at foundation of world. Scripture confirms this throughout. The gospel exists because of this brokenness. Whether brokenness came from Satan's rebellion or Adam's sin or both, the answer changes details but not overall story. God is healing world that went wrong. Creation week, whether original creation or restoration, is part of that healing. And our lives, whether we accept gap theory or not, are part of God's restoration work too. We're invited to participate in renewal, in bringing order to chaos, light to darkness, healing to what's broken. That's what matters most about Genesis 1. Not exact timeline, but invitation to join God in restoration.